particular, you're also going to be looking at this thing and developing further your contingency funding plan. This is probably where you can spend an awful lot of work. The contingency funding plan deals, again, with a variety of things. What kinds of stress scenarios you're going to have, what their triggers are, what the indicators are. You're going to have policies and plans that are going to monitor the status of these triggers or indicator events. And you're also going to develop plans for what you're going to do in response. Okay? What contingent sources do you have? How are you going to access them? Finally, all of this stuff is going to be reviewed and involved with your ALCO. Your board's going to have to approve it. There are going to be reports coming back to your board and to ALCO on liquidity metrics, other activities like testing in particular. That's a new one. So, what are the auditor's expectations? Well, he's going to expect to see some well-defined stress scenarios. These are going to have to be quantified. Okay? Quantified. You can put numbers around it. Cash flow projections are a good place to start, and then you say, okay, I have something in my scenario that says I've lost my well-capitalized status. I now have to get rid of my broker deposits. Got to run them off. Can't use them as a source of additional liquidity. You need to take that into account when you evaluate that scenario. Okay? The third thing that you're going to do, so you do need to test some of these extreme scenarios. The third thing you're going to do is then test your contingent funding sources. Do walkthroughs of those that you cannot readily test. If you have a line, draw it down. This will help identify issues in your process, make sure your documentation is good, make sure that you have all the right paperwork in the right places. You're going to be monitoring your collateral, you're relying on that, and so the testing is going to be key to this. Your auditor is going to look to see a testing plan that's actually carried out. Okay. Follow-up and documentation. Again, document everything. I've listed some of the bullet items on here that deal with things that are going to be closely related to your liquidity and asset liability. For example, quite clearly you're going to try to tie both of these into your other planning processes, your ALCO activities. If you have an investment securities policy, and your liquidity says you need a certain size cushion, you need to conform the investment policy to what you're saying in your liquidity policy in terms of stable, short-term, high-quality investments of at least so many dollars. Make sure you don't have variances between them. Document everything. And finally, make sure that the board is involved in discussing, approving, reviewing, and ultimately looking at the outputs. Don't have a situation where, for some reason, you have an exception to the policy you just put in, and guess what? There's not a word of it in the board minutes. Is that policy really effective? Your auditor is going to say, what did you do about it? Okay. And by the way, decision to do nothing for good reasons is a decision. So document why. Okay. Internal controls, not much to say here other than first bullet point, direct quote from the liquidity policy. They're looking for good internal controls, and this means generally the internal auditors are going to have to implement this for you and make sure that it's properly implemented. And that involves both new programs, new ways of looking at things, and properly trained internal audit capability. Okay. Beyond that, I don't want to keep you away from coffee, so at this point I'm about ready to wrap up. Thank you.
Well, I think without getting into the details of it, I mean, what we wanted to establish today and talk about was the challenges in internal auditing. And those challenges are coming from changes in risk and from different emphasis. Certainly liquidity. Today, we've learned the Frank Dodd bill coming in with regulatory compliance. Regulations, regulatory emphasis continues to be very, very strong. We're talking about a supplement to a liquidity statement that comes out. That's 50 pages, which is a supplement. So, the industry, I mean, not that there was guidance out there about liquidity. It was a 5-page guidance, but it was in general terms. But when industry doesn't regulate and doesn't respond tell you what to do. And that's what we're seeing now on the credit side. On the lending compliance side, it's increasing number of regulations. It's not going to go away. I mean, that's a reality. So regulatory emphasis is important. We need to be able to see what's coming down the pipeline. We need to increase the reactionary time. When the regulations come out, I think one of the interesting things we see from our clients in the liquidity area, as soon as these regulations came out, generally when these guidances come out, there's usually a lead time between the time when regulators ask you, the banks to adopt them. What was interesting about this is the guidances came out, April, I think, or January and April they started coming out, and regulatory exams that were in process, or that were in June or July, regulators were citing the banks for not having this, not doing a dynamic model, leaving a static balance sheet, not testing your contingency funding plan. So once the guidance comes out, we don't know what the time frame between the regulators will be. And I can tell you, liquidity, it was immediate, and it continues to be immediate. And we're seeing, regulatory actions and MRAs in some cases. And I think we saw in the earlier session, the severity of the regulatory action certainly is dependent on your capital levels. If you're stronger capital-wise and credit impairment-wise, you might the commentary may be somewhat less severe. But if not, it can be very severe. Industry-wide emphasis, IT, and I think Pete made a strong case today about Graham reached Wiley and the regulatory controls that we have in place. But we need to supplement that with preventative controls and to make that complete picture. All of this, from an internal audit perspective, I tell you, is subject matter expertise. Subject matter expertise. You've got to know your subject. Within the bank, management has to know it. The individuals we hold responsible for the controls, day-to-day management, have to understand these changes and have to react to them. As auditors, we have to know them. We are glass defense, and we come in there, and if things go wrong, people will point fingers. So what's today's challenge? We've got conflicts and expectations. We've got to balance the increased risk with a decreased audit resources. I know logic would dictate this is the wrong time for budget cuts. It's not music to my ears. Spend more on internal audit. Spend all the money you have on internal audit. Internal audit will save you, but that's not the reality. Internal audit, you're not going to spend everything on internal audit. You have to manage it. We've got conflicts and expectations. Regulators, we've talked about it before, more scrutiny. They want more, document. Even if you don't make a decision, Jim said, that's a decision. You've got to document that. Audit committee, well, they're scared. They want to protect this increased risk. They want to make sure that as bankers, you know what you're doing. As auditors, we know what we're doing. Senior management, top management, shareholders want to save some money, cut back resources. We've got conflict. That's the recipe for conflict. I can tell you, there really is a conflict in today's environment right now. And how do we manage that is a serious concern. I don't have the answers, but I think it's for discussion, something to walk away with, take away. Some of the practical things we can do, we can look at our audit resources that we do have in place. Typical thing is you create an audit plan beginning of the plan year and revisit at the end of the plan year. Well, guess what's happening? I think the landscapes are changing so fast. I don't know if you can wait a year. One of the things you may want to do, one of the things we're suggesting to our clients as we talk to them, let's look at this audit plan in the middle of the year. Do we have to do fixed assets? Do we have to do prepaid expenses this year? Do we have to do a reconciliation when we know that they have a good job? The financial area has done a great job. Maybe we can look at impaired loans. Maybe we can look at troubled debt restructuring. Maybe we can go out of our comfort zone and look at areas that we maybe don't have a handle on, but somebody's got to look at it. We've got to understand. We've got to look at liquidity. We've got to look at IT. So, increased training. You can co-source, outsource audit activities. The other thing you may want to think about is reliance on self-assessment. That's an area. Try to do more on your own monitoring instead of relying on outside internal audit to do this. And I think that with that, we'll running out of time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, or we can, we'll be outside of the coffee. If you want to approach us there, because I know time is running out, we can feel